The last free place on Earth. Imagine a place where the rules of the modern world simply dissolve, where there are no utility bills, no mayor, no police force, and absolutely no building codes. A sprawling expanse of barren desert land where people have built homes out of discarded pallets, old tires, and whatever else the wasteland has offered them, creating a society that operates entirely on its own unspoken social contract. And I want you to take just a moment right now to drop a comment below telling me which country or city you are watching this from, because I am genuinely curious to see how far this utterly bizarre American anomaly reaches, and whether the concept of a completely lawless town sounds like an absolute nightmare to you, or a fascinating social experiment that you would actually want to witness with your own eyes. This is Slab City, a name that sounds unassuming, almost mundane, yet it represents one of the most radical, misunderstood, and captivating living experiments in the entire United States of America. A place that defies every conventional understanding of what a town should be. Nestled in the deep, unforgiving heart of the Colorado Desert in Southern California, where the summer temperatures routinely soar past 120 degrees Fahrenheit, turning the cracked earth into a literal frying pan. Yet despite these lethal conditions, or perhaps because of them, thousands of people flock here every winter to live out their lives far removed from the grasping hands of the state. To understand Slab City, you have to understand that it is not a tourist destination, it is not a commune in the traditional sense, and it is certainly not a planned community. It is an accident of geography and bureaucracy, a leftover piece of military history that was abandoned by the government and subsequently reclaimed by the drifters, the outcasts, the artists, the veterans, and the runaway souls of America who had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. The barren womb of the Colorado Desert. To truly grasp the sheer audacity of building a community here, you have to look at the land itself, a merciless, arid basin that sits below sea level, trapped between the Salton Sea to the west and the rugged, desolate mountains that frame the horizon in every direction, creating a natural crucible that traps heat and punishes anyone who underestimates it. The geography of this region is violently hostile, characterized by vast stretches of sand, creosote bushes, and the occasional Palo Verde tree that seems to be clinging to life by sheer willpower alone, all sitting atop a desiccated ancient lakebed that coughs up dust storms so thick they can blot out the sun and reduce visibility to zero in a matter of seconds. The climate here is not merely hot, it is categorically extreme, with summer highs that regularly breach 120 degrees Fahrenheit, making it one of the hottest inhabited places on the North American continent, while the winters, by stark contrast, offer a brief, balmy reprieve with daytime temperatures in the comfortable 70s and freezing nights that drop into the 30s, a diurnal temperature swing that tests the structural integrity of every makeshift shelter. The natural environment offers absolutely nothing to sustain human life naturally. There is no surface water, no edible vegetation in any meaningful quantity, and the wildlife consists primarily of rattlesnakes, scorpions, coyotes, and the occasional desert tortoise, creatures built for survival in a way that the soft, unadapted human body simply is not. Yet, this very hostility is exactly what drew the first pioneers of Slab City to it, because a land this worthless to the mainstream economy is a land that the government and corporate developers will ignore. And I want you to really think about that for a second, and tell me in the comments if you believe that true freedom can only exist in places that nobody else wants. Because it is a profound philosophical question that gets to the very core of why Slab City exists at all. The silence of the desert is deafening, broken only by the howl of the wind through the makeshift structures and the distant hum of generators, creating an eerie, almost meditative atmosphere that forces every newcomer to confront their own internal demons the moment they step out of their vehicles and realize they are entirely on their own. From World War II to abandoned concrete, the story of how this unforgiving patch of dirt became a lawless metropolis begins not with hippies or rebels, but with the United States military during the height of the Second World War, when the federal government seized this barren land to build Camp Dunlap, a fully operational Marine Corps base designed to train troops for the brutal amphibious assaults they would face across the Pacific Theater. Between 1942 and 1945, thousands of young Marines sweated, marched, and drilled on this exact ground. living in sprawling tent cities, and utilizing a massive infrastructure of concrete slab foundations, roads, mess halls, and shower buildings that were hastily constructed to support the war effort. The military chose this specific location precisely because it mirrored the harsh, arid environments of the Pacific Islands they were destined to invade, offering a punishing testing ground that hardened the troops and weeded out those who could not endure the extreme conditions. However, when the war ended, the strategic necessity of Camp Dunlap vanished almost overnight, and by 1946, the Marine Corps had packed up, decommissioned the base, and walked away, leaving behind nothing but hundreds of massive, perfectly level concrete slabs that once supported barracks and administrative buildings, a ghostly grid of abandoned infrastructure baking in the relentless desert sun. For years, these slabs sat entirely unused, a forgotten relic of a global conflict slowly being reclaimed by the sand, until the 1950s and 60s, when a new breed of American pioneer began to discover them, wanderers traveling in converted buses and cheap campers, who realized that these flat, solid concrete platforms were the perfect foundation upon which to park their vehicles and establish a temporary, unbothered existence. The name Slab City was born not from any grand proclamation, but from the literal physical reality of the place, a colloquial label slapped onto a squatter's paradise by the people who first started calling it home. And I ask you to share your guess in the comments below about how long you think the military actually used this base, because the sheer speed at which the government abandoned millions of dollars worth of infrastructure is genuinely shocking and really highlights how little value they placed on this remote desert outpost once the war was over. The first settlers and the birth of a counterculture. The initial wave of settlers who claimed the slabs were not the radical anarchists you might expect, but rather a pragmatic mix of seasonal laborers, retired snowbirds, and veterans who had a deep appreciation for the quiet isolation the desert provided. People who wanted to escape the crushing cold of northern winters without spending a dime on campground fees. These early pioneers established an unspoken rule system that still loosely governs the area today, an ethos based on radical self-reliance, mutual non-interference, and a deep-seated distrust of any form of centralized authority, creating a culture where you are entirely free to do whatever you want, provided your freedom does not directly infringe upon the freedom of the person parked next to you. By the late 1960s and into the 1970s, as the counterculture movement swept across America, Slab City began to evolve, attracting a more bohemian element, artists, musicians, draft dodgers, and those who had dropped out of the conventional capitalist system, drawn by the zero cost of living and the absolute lack of police presence. It was during this era that the population began to swell during the winter months, transforming the empty slabs into a sprawling, chaotic canvas of human ingenuity, with people building elaborate shade structures, outdoor kitchens, and communal spaces entirely from scavenged materials, establishing the foundation of a unique visual aesthetic that defines the area to this day. The demographic shift was profound, moving from a collection of quiet retirees to a vibrant, albeit chaotic, melting pot of societal dropouts. And I would love for you to tell me in the comments if you have ever met someone who just completely walked away from normal society to live off the grid, because the stories of how these individuals ended up in Slab City are always incredibly deeply personal and often heartbreaking. This transitional period cemented the identity of the slabs as a refuge for those who had fallen through the cracks of the American dream, a place where failure in the traditional sense was not stigmatized, but rather worn as a badge of honor, and where the lack of material wealth was replaced by an abundance of unrestricted personal liberty. Anatomy of Anarchy: How a Lawless Society Functions. One of the most bewildering aspects of Slab City for an outsider to comprehend is how a community of several thousand people can function without a single police officer, judge, or written law to govern their behavior, operating entirely on a complex web of social dynamics, reputation, and the immediate consequences of one's actions. Because there is no local government, disputes are rarely settled through the legal system, as calling the county sheriff is considered a cardinal sin, an unforgivable betrayal of the community's foundational principle of keeping state authority out of their lives, which means that conflicts over property, noise, or interpersonal drama must be resolved directly between the parties involved. This creates a fascinating, high-stakes social environment where your reputation is your most valuable asset, and where being known as a thief, a liar, or a violent individual can quickly result in being completely ostracized, which in a place with no social safety net is a punishment far more severe than a short stint in a county jail. If a serious crime occurs, such as a murder or a violent assault, the Imperial County Sheriff's Department technically has jurisdiction, but their response times can stretch for hours due to the remote location, and their investigations are often hampered by a community that views cops with deep suspicion and almost never cooperates with investigations, creating a de facto state of judicial immunity for certain low-level crimes. The community has developed its own informal safety nets, with certain long-term residents taking on quasi-leadership roles, not through election, but through sheer force of personality, longevity, and the respect they have earned by providing resources or mediation to others over the years. I want you to really sit with this concept for a moment and drop a comment below, explaining whether you think human beings are fundamentally good enough to police themselves without a centralized authority. Because looking at Slab City forces you to confront your deepest assumptions about human nature, and whether laws are the only thing keeping society from collapsing into absolute violence, or if they are actually just an illusion of control that we have been conditioned to believe we need. The water problem engineering miracles in a dust bowl. The single most critical challenge of surviving in Slab City is the absolute absence of municipal water, meaning that every drop of liquid that touches a resident's lips, cleans their body, or waters their meager gardens must be physically transported into the settlement from the outside world, a logistical hurdle that dictates the rhythm of life in the slabs. Residents typically rely on a combination of strategies to secure water, with the most common being the weekly pilgrimage to the nearby town of Nyland, about 3 miles away, where they can fill up large plastic drums and tanks at the local water filling stations or fire hydrants, paying a few cents per gallon before strapping the heavy containers to bicycles, modified golf carts, or the roofs of their cars for the slow, sweaty journey back to their camps. More affluent slabbies, a relative term, might invest in large water storage tanks and have commercial water delivery trucks pump hundreds of gallons directly into their camps. But this costs significant money, creating a stark divide between those who have the resources to secure a comfortable water supply and those who must scrape by on a few gallons a day, carefully rationing every single drop. The engineering required to make this water usable is remarkably inventive, with residents building complex filtration systems using sand, charcoal, and chlorine bleach to ensure the water they haul from town is safe to drink, while others rely entirely on bottled water for consumption and use their stored tank water strictly for showering and washing dishes. Gray water, the runoff from showers and sinks, is often repurposed to irrigate small, defiant patches of greenery, creating surreal oases of palm trees and small vegetable gardens that stand in stark, beautiful contrast to the surrounding death of the desert. Before we move on, I want to ask you to share your thoughts in the comments on how much water you use in a single day in your normal life, because calculating that number and comparing it to the strict rationing forced upon the people of Slab City is a deeply humbling exercise that really makes you appreciate the invisible infrastructure that keeps the rest of the modern world alive. Salvation Mountain and the Mad Art of Leonard Knight. You cannot talk about Slab City without talking about its most famous and beloved resident, a man named Leonard Knight, who arrived in the area in 1984 with a singular, obsessive mission to spread a simple message of God's love by painting a massive, sprawling, Technicolor mountain out of adobe clay and donated paint. Leonard was not a wealthy man, nor was he a formally trained artist. He was a quiet, deeply religious former mechanic who spent nearly 30 years of his life building Salvation Mountain, layering thousands of gallons of acrylic paint over a sprawling dirt hill, creating a massive, psychedelic monument covered in biblical verses, flowers, and towering crosses that rises abruptly out of the desert floor like a fever dream. His dedication was absolute, living in a small, cramped truck parked at the base of his creation, enduring the brutal summers and freezing winters with nothing but his faith and his paint, slowly transforming a barren mound of earth into a recognized folk art masterpiece that would eventually be added to the National Register of Historic Places. Salvation Mountain became the undeniable spiritual and geographical heart of Slab City, a meeting point, a tourist attraction, and a symbol of the kind of obsessive, unmedicated creativity that the absolute freedom of the slabs allows to flourish, drawing visitors from all over the world who would stand at the base of the painted hill with their mouths agape in disbelief. Leonard passed away in 2014, but his legacy is fiercely protected by a small group of dedicated volunteers who continuously patch and paint the mountain to prevent it from melting back into the desert from which it was born, a constant battle against the harsh elements that mirrors the battle every resident of Slab City fights against nature itself. I am genuinely curious to know if any of you watching have ever visited Salvation Mountain in person, so please share your experience in the comments below, because seeing photographs of this place simply does not capture the overwhelming sensory overload and the deeply emotional weight of standing in front of one man's lifelong, painted testament to his beliefs in the middle of absolute nowhere. East Jesus and the culture of radical recycling. Just a short walk from the painted glory of Salvation Mountain lies another cornerstone of Slab City's cultural identity, an art installation and intentional living community known as East Jesus, a name chosen specifically to represent its geographic and ideological position as far away from mainstream American consumer culture as physically possible. East Jesus was founded by a group of artists who wanted to push the boundaries of the Slab City ethos even further, creating a sprawling, ever-evolving outdoor museum constructed entirely from the garbage, refuse, and discarded detritus of mainstream society, turning the literal trash of the modern world into striking, often disturbing, and deeply thought-provoking sculptures. The landscape here is littered with towering figures made of broken electronics, rusted car parts, burned-out mannequins, and thousands of glass bottles arranged in mesmerizing patterns, all meticulously arranged to force the viewer to confront their own complicity in a throwaway culture that creates mountains of waste out of sight and out of mind. The residents of East Jesus operate under a strict ethos of radical sustainability, proving that what society deems worthless can be repurposed into something profoundly beautiful and meaningful. Running their operations largely on solar power and scavenged materials, hosting artists and residents who come from all over the world to immerse themselves in this chaotic creative incubator. This environment fosters a deeply intellectual and philosophical subculture within the larger Slab City ecosystem, where conversations around the campfire might range from advanced quantum physics to the inherent failures of late-stage capitalism, all set against the backdrop of a glowing, fire-spitting sculpture made out of old shopping carts. I want you to think about the last thing you threw in the trash and tell me in the comments if you could imagine turning that exact item into a piece of art, because the mental shift required to look at a broken washing machine and see the skeleton of a metal dragon is exactly the kind of out-of-the-box thinking that Slab City demands of every single person who chooses to live there. The Slab City Library and the Range. Despite its reputation as a chaotic, lawless wasteland, Slab City possesses a surprisingly robust cultural infrastructure, most notably the Slab City Library, a humble, open-air structure built from scrap wood and tarps that houses thousands of donated books, magazines, and DVDs, serving as the intellectual watering hole for a population that is often highly educated but deeply disenfranchised. The library operates on the honor system. There are no due dates, no library cards, and no fines, relying entirely on the goodwill of the community to return materials so that others might enjoy them, a system that, surprisingly, works remarkably well, because in a place where entertainment is scarce and internet access is a luxury, books are treated like gold. Just down the road is The Range, an outdoor performance venue and nightclub built from plywood and salvage materials that serves as the social heartbeat of the settlement, hosting open mic nights, live music, and the infamous Slab City Talent show every Saturday evening as the sun dips below the mountains and the desert air finally cools. The Range was established decades ago by a resident known simply as Builder Bill, and it features a covered stage, makeshift bar, and rows of benches where hundreds of slabbies gather to drink cheap beer, dance under the stars, and temporarily forget the harsh realities of their off-grid existence. These communal spaces are vital to the psychological survival of the residents, providing a sense of normalcy and shared human connection that prevents the isolation of the desert from driving them completely mad. And I would love to hear from you in the comments about what kind of communal space you would build if you were dropped into an empty desert with absolutely no money, because the ingenuity of the people who built the range and the library from literal garbage is nothing short of inspiring. Demographics of the damned who actually lives here. When you look closely at the census data and the demographic breakdown of Slab City, you quickly realize that the stereotype of the unwashed, drug-addled hippie is a massive oversimplification of a deeply complex and diverse population that shifts dramatically depending on the season. During the scorching summer months, the population plummets to maybe a few hundred hardy souls, predominantly older, deeply entrenched residents who have adapted to the heat and have nowhere else to go, along with a smattering of transient travelers and a small community of undocumented migrants who use the slabs as a temporary staging ground. However, as winter approaches and the temperatures drop across the northern United States and Canada, Slab City experiences a massive influx of snowbirds, retirees living on fixed incomes, and nomadic workers who drive their RVs south to escape the cold, swelling the population to an estimated 3,000 to 4,000 people, completely transforming the quiet, desolate summer slabs into a bustling, chaotic winter metropolis. You'll find a significant number of military veterans among the population, drawn to the isolation and the camaraderie of other broken men and women who found the transition back to civilian life impossible. Living side by side with young, idealistic anarchists, traveling European tourists, recovering addicts, and genuinely brilliant artists and engineers who simply grew tired of the rat race. The racial and economic demographics are equally varied, though it leans heavily toward a white, lower-income demographic, with a growing number of younger people priced out of the traditional housing market who are turning to places like Slab City as a last-ditch effort to live freely without the crushing weight of rent and utility bills. I am asking you to share your own housing situation in the comments below, because comparing the cost of your monthly rent or mortgage to the absolute zero cost of living in Slab City really puts into perspective the desperate economic realities that are driving a new generation of Americans to consider living in a lawless desert as a viable alternative to the traditional American dream. The shadow economy, buying, selling, and surviving. Because there are no formal businesses, no commercial zoning, and no sales tax collection in Slab City, the local economy operates entirely in the shadows, functioning as a complex, unregulated barter system mixed with a cash and crypto-based underground market that somehow manages to provide for almost every basic human need. The most visible aspect of this economy is the weekly open-air market, where residents set up tables and tailgates to sell everything from handmade jewelry and scavenged antiques to fresh baked bread, medical marijuana, and illegally modified electronic equipment, all without a single business license or health inspection to be found. Many residents survive by offering specialized skills to their neighbors, trading mechanic work for food, solar panel installation for drinking water, or tattoo art for a tank of gasoline, creating a deeply interconnected web of mutual aid where your ability to survive is directly tied to your willingness to help others survive. In recent years, the digital economy has made its way into the slabs, with several residents working remote freelance jobs or running online businesses from their solar-powered laptops, injecting actual US currency into the local ecosystem, and creating a strange juxtaposition of 21st century digital nomadism existing inside a 19th century style frontier town. The marijuana trade has also become a significant economic engine, as California's lax cannabis laws allow residents to cultivate and sell the plant with relative impunity, turning some enterprising slabbies into de facto dispensary owners who cater to both the local population and the steady stream of curious tourists who make the pilgrimage down the dirt road. I want you to guess in the comments what you think the most commonly traded item in Slab City is, because the answer might surprise you and really highlights how drastically human priorities shift when you strip away the convenience of a modern grocery store and a functioning municipal water system. Crime without cops, theft, violence, and the reality of lawlessness. The most common question people ask about Slab City is whether the absence of police leads to a Mad Max-style dystopia of constant violence and chaos, and the reality is far more nuanced, existing in a strange gray area between radical peace and unpredictable danger. property crime, particularly theft, is an acknowledged reality of life in the slabs. Because when you have a population of largely transient individuals living in extreme poverty with no legal repercussions, things like bicycles, generators, solar panels, and water tanks have a tendency to walk away in the middle of the night. However, the community polices this to the best of its ability through a highly effective grapevine of communication, utilizing CB radios and word of mouth to immediately alert the entire settlement when a thief is spotted, often resulting in the stolen goods being returned out of sheer social pressure and the very real threat of being run out of town by a mob of angry neighbors. Violent crime, while not an everyday occurrence, does happen. And when it does, it sends shockwaves through the community because there is no 911 to call, no ambulances that will automatically navigate the maze of dirt roads, and no immediate legal recourse to protect the vulnerable. There have been documented murders, sexual assaults, and brutal fights over territorial disputes or drug debts, incidents that are often handled quietly by the community or, in the worst cases, reluctantly handed over to the Imperial County Sheriff, who are viewed not as protectors, but as an invasive force that only arrives after the damage has already been done. I need you to drop a comment below and tell me if you believe a community has the right to handle violent crimes internally without involving the state, because the ethical implications of Slab City's justice system, or lack thereof, force you to confront some of the most difficult questions about the balance between personal liberty and public safety. Dark legends and unresolved mysteries beneath the sun. Beneath the surface of the vibrant art and the communal camaraderie lies a deeply dark underbelly of Slab City, a history peppered with unsolved mysteries, notorious fugitives, and tragic deaths that the desert sands have failed to completely erase. Because it is a place where people come to disappear, the slabs have occasionally served as a hiding spot for wanted criminals, most famously in 2002 when the FBI surrounded the camp looking for a suspected domestic terrorist, turning the normally peaceful winter gathering into a tense, armed standoff that resulted in the suspect taking his own life before he could be captured. There are persistent, whispered legends about people who wandered into the desert surrounding the slabs without adequate water or navigation and simply vanished, their bones bleaching in the sun for years before being discovered by a wandering coyote or an off-roader. Tragedies that serve as a grim reminder of the lethal indifference of the natural environment. The transient nature of the population also means that people routinely arrive with fake names, fabricated backstories, and hidden pasts, creating an atmosphere of inherent mystery where you might be sharing a campfire with a brilliant philosopher one night and a convicted felon the next, with absolutely no way to know the difference. These dark elements are not the defining characteristic of Slab City, but they are an inescapable byproduct of a lawless environment, adding a palpable edge of danger to the air that both repels and tantalizes those who hear its siren call. Before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to ask you to share the most mysterious or unexplained thing that has ever happened in your own hometown in the comments, because comparing the dark legends of your communities to the outright bizarre realities of Slab City is a fascinating way to realize that every single place on Earth has a shadow side that its residents rarely speak about. The annual Exodus, Burning Man's older, dirtier sister. If you want to experience Slab City at its absolute most extreme, you have to be there during the annual Slab City Rendezvous, a massive unofficial gathering that takes place every February and transforms the already chaotic settlement into a sprawling, loud, and utterly lawless festival that makes Burning Man look like a highly regulated corporate retreat. During the rendezvous, the population can temporarily double or even triple as thousands of outsiders, partygoers, sound camp DJs, and curiosity seekers flood the dirt roads, setting up massive sound systems that thump bass into the desert night until the early hours of the morning, creating a surreal juxtaposition against the quiet, survivalist mentality of the permanent residents. This influx creates immense friction within the community, as the people who live there year-round struggle to maintain their fragile ecosystem of respect and mutual aid against a tidal wave of tourists who often treat the slabs as a giant, lawless playground, leaving behind massive amounts of trash, consuming resources, and ignoring the unspoken social contracts that keep the peace during the quieter months. The rendezvous is a microcosm of the ultimate paradox of Slab City, a place that demands absolute freedom but is constantly threatened by the consequences of that freedom when exposed to the broader, less disciplined masses of mainstream society who descend upon it once a year. It is during this time that the sheer density of humanity pushes the limited infrastructure of water, sanitation, and social tolerance to its absolute breaking point, resulting in a chaotic, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying spectacle that perfectly encapsulates the spirit of this bizarre American anomaly. The government's watchful eye and the threat of eviction. Despite its lawless reputation, Slab City exists on land that is actually owned by the state of California, managed by the Colorado River Basin Regional Water Quality Control Board, which means that the entire settlement is technically an illegal squat, existing entirely at the mercy of a government that could, at any moment, decide to evict the thousands of people living there. Over the decades, there have been numerous attempts by the state to clean up the area, citing environmental concerns over the massive amount of trash, human waste, and hazardous materials that accumulate in the desert, leading to tense standoffs between state officials and the fiercely independent residents who view any government intervention as an act of war. In recent years, the state has increased its pressure, issuing notices of violation, threatening heavy fines, and occasionally bringing in bulldozers to clear out specific areas deemed to be severe environmental hazards, actions that strike terror into the hearts of the older residents who have nowhere else to go. The legal limbo of Slab City is a constant, low-level anxiety that hangs over the community, a reminder that their freedom is not a guaranteed right, but merely a temporary oversight by a bureaucracy that simply has not yet found a politically expedient reason to spend the millions of dollars it would take to forcibly remove them. I want you to tell me in the comments if you think the government has a moral obligation to leave these people alone, or if the environmental damage justifies a forced eviction, because the legal and ethical debate over the future of Slab City is a deeply complex issue with no easy answers. The paradox of freedom and a final invitation. Slab City is not a utopia, and it is certainly not a place that most people could survive in for more than a few days, but it stands as a raw, unfiltered mirror reflecting the deepest extremes of the human condition, a place where the absolute stripping away of modern conveniences reveals exactly what we are capable of when left entirely to our own devices. It is a land of profound contradictions, a place of immense creativity born from absolute destitution, a community built on isolation, and a society that enforces a strict code of respect through the complete absence of formal laws. To look at Slab City is to confront the terrifying, beautiful reality that human beings do not need nearly as much structure, governance, and material wealth as we have been conditioned to believe we do, and that given a flat piece of concrete and an empty desert sky, people will inevitably find a way to build a world of their own. If this deep dive into the harsh, mesmerizing reality of America's last lawless town fascinated you as much as it fascinated me to research, I strongly encourage you to hit that like button right now and take exactly 1 second to subscribe to this channel, because we are dedicated to pulling back the curtain on the most unique, obscure, and unbelievable locations across the entire United States of America. And by subscribing, you guarantee that you will never miss out on the hidden histories and shocking truths of the towns and cities that your geography teachers never told you about. Every single video on this channel is crafted to take you on a journey into the unknown, revealing the deep cultural, historical, and psychological layers of the American landscape, and your subscription is the exact fuel that keeps these deep dive investigations coming. So join our community of curious minds right now. Leave a comment with your thoughts on Slab City, and I will see you in the next exploration.